In a side-splitting comedy of errors, a record-breaking number of asylum seekers and migrants have stormed the southern border of the United States, leaving states and cities nursing a serious case of financial whiplash. With the pandemic still lingering, local governments are stuck holding the bag, bearing the brunt of the economic fallout. Migrants face long delays in obtaining employment authorization and typically lack local connections. These factors have placed a heavy burden on municipalities, which have already allocated billions of dollars to address immediate needs. This situation has strained housing markets and sparked blame game between city, state, and federal leaders. It is essential to find a collaborative solution to manage this crisis. So, in this video, we're going to dive into why and how American cities are facing financial troubles. We'll break down the factors that have led to these bankruptcies and explore the consequences they've had on communities across the country. So, buckle up and let's get into it. First, let's give you a glimpse of the current situation. The Committee on the Judiciary and Subcommittee on Immigration Integrity, Security and Enforcement report that since President Biden took office on January 20th, 2021, more than 3.3 million illegal immigrants have been allowed to re-enter the country, resulting in billions of dollars of expenses for both federal and state taxpayers. According to a committee report, the Biden administration eliminated local immigration enforcement in order to allow undocumented immigrants to stay in the nation. This obviously adds to the mounting expense that American taxpayers are bearing. The problem is estimated to cost the federal and state governments $150.7 billion in 1 year, including for elements such as emergency medical care, the detention of illegal immigrants in local jails, and government budgets that provide billions of cash in welfare payments annually. Just to give a hint on how this issue is becoming more prevalent, the United States spent almost $116 billion on illegal immigration in 2017. This figure went up to $150 billion recently. Can you believe that the $150.7 billion spent on illegal immigration in the previous year was greater than the GDP of Idaho, New Mexico, and Mississippi? Unfortunately, the cost of illegal immigration has now reached $150.7 billion per year, and this burden eventually finds its way onto taxpayers' shoulders. The United States pays $8,776 a year for each illegal immigrant and their child born in the country, and each American taxpayer is paying approximately $1,156 a year out of the $8,776, or roughly $957 each after deducting the taxes paid by undocumented immigrants. That's a huge economic burden. So let's dig into how cities are coping with this massive influx of people. But before we go into it, if you like the video so far, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Large American cities, including New York City, Chicago, and Denver, have experienced financial difficulty as a result of the southern border immigration wave. S&P Global Ratings reports that New York City expended $1.45 billion on immigration in the fiscal year 2023, and plans to spend an additional $4.2 billion and $4.9 billion on housing immigrants who cross the US-Mexico border in the fiscal years of 2024 and 2025. The situation is also challenging in Chicago. In fiscal year 2023, Chicago spent $275 million on new arrivals. In 2024, however, the city only set aside $150 million to shelter new illegal immigrants. Denver, which spent over $46 million on immigrants in the fiscal year 2023, is reportedly already experiencing large cost overruns. Costs associated with housing and other services for immigrants are likewise sharply increasing in other US cities. To be specific, Massachusetts has already spent at least $360 million in fiscal year 2024 on housing, transportation, and other services linked to migrants, while Washington, D.C. has already spent more than $36.4 million. So, with an overwhelming number of immigrants coming to the United States, the question arises, where will they all live? Finding suitable housing for such a large influx of people can be a real challenge. When arriving in Washington, D.C., migrants can obtain temporary housing in the district or in neighboring Montgomery County, Maryland. Furthermore, the DC government has been paying for the lodging of over 1,000 refugees and has agreements with nearby restaurants to provide meals. But because these facilities can't keep up with demand, newly arrived people are forced to sleep in automobiles or crash with volunteers. Nonetheless, the District of Columbia has an advantage over New York City since, according to the district's Department of Human Services, less than 25% of arriving migrants aim to remain in the area, with the remainder planning to migrate to other locations, including New York. In Denver, the situation is also very challenging. Actually, Denver has experienced spikes in immigration since December 2023 and was housing roughly 1,000 migrants in shelters designating for migrants. In the past, when there were significant influxes, the city established emergency shelters for the night in recreational facilities and other places. Additionally, the city has asked religious institutions to house migrants who plan to leave town the following day. This spring, with the assistance from the college and neighborhood migrant-serving organizations, hundreds of migrants set up camp in a university parking garage. So, with the presence of immigrants becoming increasingly apparent, it is worth investigating if their arrival and presence comes at the potential expense of American citizens. It is important to understand how the two groups may interact and impact each other in the socio-economic landscape. In fact, neighborhood centers and athletic venues owned by Americans have been taken over to house immigrants. An African-American neighborhood in Roxbury, Massachusetts, had its community center taken over by state officials and converted into a shelter for undocumented immigrants. The priorities of the city administration are evident, despite the assurances given to the citizens that this was a temporary measure. The magnitude of unauthorized immigration into Denver, Colorado, led by the mayor of Denver to declare a state of emergency because the strain being placed on city resources. And the list of challenges goes on. American kids are likewise losing out. After the local authorities in Brooklyn, New York, utilized the school as a sanctuary for 1,900 illegal immigrants, the students were forced to make the switch to remote learning in January 2024. Authorities in New York City housed illegal immigrants in 20 school fitness centers in May 2023, with adult migrants hunching over faucets that were the size of children. In Texas, officials purchased a middle school using federal dollars and turned it into a migrant housing complex. This means that American taxpayer cash was used to purchase a school, which was subsequently utilized to prevent American children from attending in favor of illegal aliens. There are now 2,800 illegal immigrant children enrolled in Denver schools, taking instructors' attention away from American students and driving up demand for expensive English learner programs, whether in New York, Texas, or any other place in between. It appears that ensuring that illegal aliens are allowed to remain in the country takes priority over the education of children in American cities. The influx of illegal immigration is also starting to compromise public safety in the cities. There are now violent street gangs operating throughout American cities, including the Venezuelan group Tren de la Agua, which presents a threat to public safety. Groups of undocumented immigrants have been strongly linked to crime sprees even when they are not part of official multinational cartels. Consider the Venezuelan gang that robbed stores in Chicago or the NYPD cops that were beaten in front of startled visitors in Times Square. These are tragedies that strike Americans every day beyond the headlines. Sex offenders who assault American women and children in sanctuary jurisdictions, drunk drivers who kill Americans, and other such incidents. So it appears that there are more and more challenges to this massive influx of people. But one important challenge that we shouldn't ignore is related to housing, and the government must be doing something about it. The housing issue that was already there in many places has been made worse by the effort to shelter migrants. The crisis was made worse by the federal COVID-19 assistance funding drying down, which resulted in people losing their extra income and several localities ending their rent and mortgage support programs. The fact that migrant shelters in many cities are distinct from those to the local homeless population not only enables officials to address the unique needs of migrants, but also prevents competition between the two groups. The Office of Migrant Affairs in Washington, D.C. was established by a new statute that specifically barred immigrants from the ordinary services provided by the city to homeless citizens. Many cities find it difficult to provide immigrants with long-term integration support, such as services, legal aid, and mental health and medical care because of the housing crisis. While non-profit service providers are rarely able to cover these gaps, they can occasionally. It appears that cities do not yet have policies in place to assist migrants in leaving shelters and achieving self-sufficiency. Recently, New York City increased casework assistance to aid newcomers in finding alternative options. However, New York City is now unable to compel migrants to locate alternative accommodation due to its right to shelter. So it appears that the housing problem isn't solved yet. What about the challenges of finding jobs? In fact, 50 federal officials will be sent by the federal government to help migrants who want to petition for work permits and asylum. Resources are also being allocated by other authorities to assist migrants in obtaining work permission. Governor Kathy Hochul of New York has committed $50 million and 250 National Guard members to case management in these kinds of initiatives. In early September, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey said that her state will assist migrants in applying for work permits by collaborating with regional offices of refugee resettlement and covering the cost of the applications. To sum up, because of the huge expenses incurred by illegal immigrants, Americans in the cities bear a clear and unpleasant economic and tax burden. More money will be spent on migrant-related expenses in New York City than on the NYPD, Fire Department, and Department of Sanitation put together. The constant influx of undocumented migrants entering the United States places an additional financial strain on taxpayers at a time when Americans are already struggling to make ends meet. Whatever the correct response, it is obvious that cities need resources and instruments to support long-term integration of migrants as well as their urgent needs. Local cities have found themselves on the front lines and are collapsing under the weight of it all, with no help from the federal government. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons to receive more content. See you in the next video.